Here's some news from the world over. For the first time in 8 years, the Democratic Party has control of the U.S. House of Representatives after this week's midterm elections. It looks like Democrats will have at least a 28-seat advantage in the House. In the Senate, Republicans have maintained control, flipping at least 4 democratically held seats. They now hold a 51 to 46-seat advantage. Both parties claimed overall victory after the election and expressed the desire to reach across the political divide. Joining me now to discuss the results and the likelihood, or lack thereof, of bipartisan cooperation is former speechwriter for President George W. Bush and columnist at the Wall Street Journal, Bill McGurn. Bill, thanks for being here.
Hi, Raymond.
Hey, I want to start with what you make of this breakdown. Are we going to see cross-aisle deals? Are we going to see bipartisanship, or will this quickly collapse into Trump investigation 2.0?
Well, I think the latter is more likely. Look, Americans like to hear talk about bipartisanship, so both Mrs. Pelosi and Donald Trump talked about it after. And on paper, there are a lot of areas where I think they could reach deals. Actually, I think a lot of the Democrats are closer to President Trump on trade policy than Republicans are. I think maybe on infrastructure. I think on health care, that'd be more difficult because Mrs. Pelosi regards Obamacare as her legacy, as well as Barack Obama. On immigration, I think there's a straightforward deal, border wall for DACA, but those are all on paper. And once you start going down the road of investigations and accusations, I think that all kind of goes by the wayside. And that'll be the question. But right now they're talking bipartisanship. But, and here's an example, immigration. I think immigration, comprehensive reform is still is not possible. Remote. I mean, I was there when President Bush tried it, right? It's just too big to, but there are parts we can bite off. And a simple trade of giving the president money for a signature issue, the border wall, in exchange for regularizing the DACA kids, you know, who are brought here without their consent and so forth. That, on paper, is a great deal. Each side gains something, right? Yeah. I'm not sure the Democrats would want to hand President Trump a victory on immigration that he would no doubt, and rightfully so, crow about in his 2020 run for president again. I'm not sure they're going to want to do that for him.
Well, he tried to do that. He tried that before, Bill. Remember, he tried to grant amnesty to 2 million people in exchange for the funding of the border wall, and they said no.
That's true. Some of the people would argue that after the initial offer, the people in the White House kind of upped the added other conditions on and so forth. Yeah. But again, that on paper is eminently doable. It's sensible. Both sides would benefit. But I just don't see the Democrats giving President Trump a big win for getting something done on immigration where all these past presidents have failed.
What do you make of these recount efforts in Florida, in Georgia? Gillum down there rescinded his concession to Ron DeSantis, and he's demanding a recount. He said there's enough here. It looks like there are more votes to be counted. Similar for Stacey Abrams in Georgia.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, a lot of these elections were within 1%, right? So it's not totally unreasonable. I think if people feel that there are activists that are going to try to use the courts to overturn an election, I think there'll be a very bad reaction. We're already polarized, and that would not help.
Bill, when you look at the exit polling here, Catholics voted 50% for the Democrats, 49% for the GOP. What does that tell us about where the Catholic people are? Or is that just a reflection of the divided country we find ourselves in?
I think it's just a reflection of the country. I saw that. That's from Pew, right? I haven't seen the breakdown, whether it's mass attending Catholics or non-practicing. I haven't seen any breakdown on that. But I think that's largely where the country is. Look, I'm in New Jersey. I think it's the most Catholic state in the Union, and it's a almost completely blue state right now.
Yeah, no, I think Catholics swing. They swing back and forth. They're not partisans. They're really not. But they do have certain issues that they keep an eye on. And then there's the cultural part of it. You know, their ethnic background that I do think shapes a lot of their perspective on these issues.
Look at Nancy Pelosi. Look, a lot of Catholic Republicans were really Democrats who were forced out of the party by the Democrats increasingly extreme stance on abortion. A lot of them didn't. In other words, a lot of them didn't embrace the Republican Party. They kind of found refuge there when they felt the Democratic Party was no longer tolerant of their views. So now we're in the kind of the second and third generation of this, but I think it's still up for grabs.
Let's talk about the impeachment chatter we're hearing in all quarters. On a scale of 1 to 10, are we going to see an impeachment article brought forward in the Democratic House?
Well, let me say two things. First, I think that's where the enthusiasm of the Democrats is right now. I believe Molly Hemingway was on the Amtrak from New York to Washington and overheard a conversation where Mr. Nadler's talking about impeachment, and I think he might have been talking about it against Brett Kavanaugh too for perjury. So that's where the appetite is. But let me tell you, when it comes to actually voting for it, it's a hard thing to get through, and rightly so. You know, the founders intended that way. Some of these Democrats, especially the ones who campaigned as more moderate, might say, do I really want this going into the 2020 reelection? So I think there'll be a lot of enthusiasm. The press will love it because it's a controversy. It'll be very stormy. President Trump will no doubt make comments in kind, like those directed against him. But it's a hard thing to do, even with all the enthusiasm there. And plus with the Republicans having the Senate, it doesn't really go anywhere, right? Unless they could get
they have to confirm it. But like Bill Clinton, you can impeach him at least, and that's the intention here. And then the House, the Senate won't confirm that impeachment, but at least they can wave around he's an impeached president, which is probably.
But here's the problem. One is it gives President Trump something to run against. What is a Democratic agenda? If they bet it all on impeachment, it doesn't leave much room for policy or what's a hopeful way forward for the American people. How are we going to improve your lives?
Right.
I'm not sure. Even I think some of the wiser heads in the Democratic Party are cautioning against it. Ed Rendell, I think, says legislate, don't impeach.
Yeah, well, Nancy Pelosi seems to be sounding the same hymn. We'll see if her brethren take up the tune. I've got to get to this. Yesterday, the president came out and he started sending bipartisan signs out during his press conference. Then he got into this squabble with Jim Acosta at CNN. I'm going to play a little piece of this and get your reaction.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate it.
That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings would
be
much better.
If I may ask one other question, Mr. President,
that's enough.
I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have?
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian investigation because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
The White House there, Bill, claims he put his hand on this intern who was trying to take the mic from him, and they took his hard pass away. Was that the right move?
I think it probably pleases a lot of the president's followers. I'm one of the few people, I've been on both sides of that.
Right.
As a member of the press and as a member of the White House, I've seen both sides. Look, I think Jim Acosta was being a jerk. But I think it would be in the president's interest almost to pay him to continue to be there. The people watching this, I don't think it creates a lot of sympathy for them. So I'm not sure I would have reacted the way the White House does. But I mean, the behavior was clearly bad. I'm also not entirely against, I'm not really against the press asking aggressive questions.
I agree with you.
But I think it's possible to be aggressive while still being respectful. And remember, he got to ask one question. The altercation came when he tried to ask another one, insisted on getting two. So it wasn't like he was shut out.
Well, if you listen closely, he stopped asking questions and he started making statements about how he saw the president's depiction of the caravan, and he was trying to inflict that viewpoint upon the president, who reacted and shut him down. But the press, look, I've been in that position too, where you're there and you're talking to a president, but I can tell you, when I was in front of President Clinton, when I was in front of President Bush, never would I have asked them a question in that tone. And I do worry about the breakdown of civility and decorum in the White House and in other institutions of our world, but particularly the White House.
I think one of the problems is when you televise the press conference, this is what you get. You create an incentive to grandstand. A lot of a press secretary's work is actually behind the scenes in a lot of kind of drudge efforts to help reporters write their stories, you know, to give them information, and you defend the administration's point of view. I think televising is not necessarily a good idea. Also, I think the whole idea of a White House press pool, a press building, I don't know. I'm increasingly doubtful of this. You know, it looks very important, but the truth is the people at the White House are not necessarily getting the big stories. They're there. They're there because it's convenient to all White Houses. The White Houses ladle out their news to them, and they answer a few questions, and they all have their own shrub out in front, you know, the NBC shrub, the Fox shrub, and so forth. But, you know, a reporter up in New York that knew someone in the White House, knew Kellyanne Conway or talked to her, or anyone else, or Jim Mattis at Defense, would probably get a lot more information than just standing outside there. So in some ways, it's more about TV these days than actual news reporting, I think.
I agree with you 100%. You're right. You're absolutely right. Let's talk for a moment about another big bit of news this week, particularly, you would think, for the Catholic world. The HHS Secretary, Alex Azar, released this finalized rule that the bishops started a fortnight for freedom over. They said their religious freedom was being endangered because Obamacare mandated contraceptives they had to give contraceptives to their employees. HHS has changed the rules, throwing that contraceptive mandate out. Where are the U.S. bishops, Bill McGurn?
Yeah, I mean, look, the larger question is why we had this silly rule in the first place. I mean, the contraceptive mandate still covers almost every single employer. It's a handful of employers. And what does it tell you about the Obama administration? That it was obsessed with forcing the Little Sisters and other groups to provide this coverage. You know, it didn't really, there's a lot of ways for the government to ensure that women get contraceptives if that's what they want and that's what they determine without forcing nuns to do it. So, you know, they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court threw out the teeth in that law, which were these crushing fines that they were going to impose on the nuns. But it kicked it back to the courts. It didn't really resolve it. The courts have largely ruled against the rule. So now the new rule is designed to reflect that. And it's sensible, but it's a shame. So much litigation, so much bad feeling, so much intemperance for really nothing.
Yeah, I agree. No, it's heartbreaking, but I am astounded, though, by the people who made so much about this, and now that it's been resolved and cleared away, there's like no reaction. Nobody has any reaction to this. So
and of course,
go ahead.
A lot of Catholic institutions took the accommodation and went ahead with contraception. I mean, the Little Sisters are notable because they stood their ground and fight. The Little Sisters stood tall.
Yeah. Give me a sense of your impression of Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, resigning this week. His number 3 down the line, Matthew Whitaker, will be taking his place. Will this affect the Mueller probe at all, and does this concern you?
No, that part doesn't concern me. We've been, you know, for years, everyone's been warning the president, don't interrupt Bob Mueller's probe. I don't think he intends to now. I have a mixed feeling on Jeff Sessions. A lot of stuff on law enforcement that he did. I think he did a good job. I think he was right not to appoint another special prosecutor on the other side for some of these problems, because I think the special counsel is itself the very corrupting provision. So I was glad that he did that. I think he was unfairly treated by the president when he was berated publicly. You know, the president has a right to replace whoever he wants, and if he didn't like Mr. Sessions, he has the right to replace him. I don't know of any management book that says you berate someone in public to get a better performance out of them. That said, I do think that Mr. Sessions' accommodation, where he recused himself from the Russia investigation, meant that the president started off with a crippled attorney general, and I think we have paid a high price for that. So I'm hoping going forward it'll be better. Look, one reason the president waited is he now has more senators coming in, and he'll get Mr. Sessions' replacement confirmed. That wasn't so clear a few months ago.
Yeah. I've got to get to this before I let you go. 85-year-old Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg took a fall this week, breaking 3 ribs. She is apparently hospitalized. Could this be another Trump Supreme Court pick in the making?
Well, it could be. I don't like to speculate that way in another person's life. I also think that, for example, Justice Thomas, whom I admire tremendously, has to think, do I want to stay on past 2020 and risk that there's Democrat taking over that appoints my seat, or do I make way now? I mean, now they have enough Senate votes, presumably, to put Amy Coney Barrett on there without even Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins if they decided to go south. So I think we could get, there's different possibilities here, and I never want to wish anyone ill for my gain. No.
But I think I'm just worried about whether she's able to be mobile enough to continue her work, not whether her life's in danger. She's a pretty sturdy woman.
It's like the Senate. The Senate and Supreme Court seems that you can be any age and, wheeled in there and do it. You have a staff that does a lot of the heavy lifting. So that's one of the few places I think you look at old Strom Thurmond and some of the justices we've had before. Those are the 2 places in the world where you can hang on for a long time.
You are quite right. The minute you said Senate and Supreme Court are the places where you can go at any age, the first person I thought of was Strom Thurmond. Where they'd give him the document and he'd go, "Today is a fine day." He'd flip the paper in mid-sentence. Anyway, Bill McGurn, thank you so much for being here. Bill's column, Main Street, appears each week in the Wall Street Journal and at the Wall Street Journal, WSJ.com.